China just discovered something that could change the military balance of power globally. Just this week, they announced a historic discovery of a massive zirconium deposit that boosts the Chinese state's reserves of this mineral fivefold, 500% increase. Now, let me tell you how this is a strategic game changer that could push the US and China closer to the point of no return. How it could lead to GASP, WW3, not WWE. That's a completely different thing. You see, we're already in Cold War 2.0, the US versus China, and zirconium is the secret ingredient, the Salt Bay spice that makes hypersonic missiles possible. So definitely something relevant, as well as a number of other military technologies. But I'm focused on hypersonics because I talk a lot about them, and they're, a piece of technology that's particularly lethal at the moment. It's one of the few materials, zirconium, that can withstand temperatures over 3,000 degrees Celsius, making it absolutely essential for the heat shields and components of hypersonic ballistic weaponry or hypersonic weaponry, and other weapons that are prone to heating up, as zirconium can resist those high temperatures. Without zirconium, your missiles melt essentially before they can reach their target, and they fry the computer chips in them that allow them to maneuver and wobble and jiggle, whatever. Now, here's the problem for the West. Before this discovery, China had less than 1% of global zirconium reserves, forcing them to import most of their supply from Australia and South Africa and some other countries. Not that Australia is an open enemy to China. In fact, the Australian population and even Australia at a state level are actually working hard to try not falling into the American sphere of influence, and in the mid to long term, or staying in America's sphere of influence to the point where America can sort of use them as a disc that they just throw at China, which obviously the Australians do not want to be. Now, this coming back to the topic, this was considered the Achilles heel in the hypersonic arms race between China and its Western adversaries. The Achilles heel meaning their supply chain weak spot, because they had because China had so little domestically of this mineral. The US actually relied on this vulnerability as a way to potentially slow down China's military modernization. Yeah, that's not really worked out. But now, China just solved their biggest strategic weakness essentially overnight. They're moving rapidly towards complete mineral self-sufficiency at exactly the moment when the world is fragmenting into competing blocks, and the Western world, especially notably, is fragmenting, where Europe and the US, on topics like Ukraine, on topics like what do we do about Russia, even the US and Western Europe are fragmenting within themselves, making it much less likely that the West will become this or will remain this cohesive bloc as we move into deep Cold War 2.0, potentially World War III territory. And within the bloc that China leads, the global south, they have South Africa, mind you, already. So South Africa holds 17% of the world's zirconium. And China just pentupled their own reserves. So it's a very good position for China to be in. And the biggest player of all, Australia, holding, hearing the 5% from China, even after this latest news, hearing the 17% from South Africa, they said, hold my minerals, hold my kangaroo, or whatever. They said, hold my outback. I've got 65% of the zirconium on Earth, just Australia by itself. Incredible. Now, this is the Australia, mind you, a reminder that Trump is basically bullying with more tariffs, pressuring, I should say, to comply with American demands. Basically, Australia, you better be the puppet on my strings. You better be ready to go to war with China for me if I say so. That's part of the AUKUS deal now. Insane. Check out my video on Australian geopolitics to learn more. And Australia is just not having it. Anthony Albanese said, we ain't having it. Sorry, that was terrible. And don't forget to, by the way, like and bookmark my post. If you like and bookmark, you might be able to. Also then comment and bribe me to stop doing bad accents. Now, moving on. Let's look at the bigger picture. We're already in Cold War 2.0 with trade wars, tech transfer bans, and proxy conflicts spreading globally. China has been systematically reducing its dependence on Western supply chains during this time, semiconductors, rare earth elements, and now critical defense minerals. A reminder, China refines over 80% of the world's rare earth elements and refines, even in zirconium's case, 80 to 90% of the whole world. So Australia has the source, China has the refinement capability, South Africa has the source, China has 5% of its own now as a source. But even the US, for example, they have to come to China to refine the resource to be able to be used in the defense sector, in military. In defense, in military. Right now, every step China takes towards self-sufficiency makes them less vulnerable to sanctions or cut-off attempts by the US later down the line, which makes them more of a threat to the US. Not as an aggressive threat, but remember, if the US is on top of the world, this is just how geopolitics works. If a country is at the top of the world and sees its position slipping, or they're maintaining their lead, you could say, or they had the lead, sorry, they're not maintaining it though, because there's the person in second place is catching up. China quietly rising can be seen as threat enough, right? That's enough. They're just winning. They'll surpass us. Well, then they're a threat, right? They don't actually have to do anything more than just keeping on that sort of a Chinese grind and catching up. And the US might panic and get aggressive, right? One hopes, that the US doesn't get to a point where their aggression or their fear that China is catching up leads to them actually carrying out some sort of initial strike or preemptive first strike, right? But that's, it's always a possibility with Thucydides' trap, which is the academic political term, but I call it falling star syndrome. When you're the best of the best and you start falling, you're a falling star, you sort of suffer from this sort of panic. My tea was about to be spilled. In that case, no problem, but start picking out your World War III outfits. Now, the timing of this huge zirconium discovery by China couldn't be worse for Washington, i.e. the American administration. The US is already struggling to keep pace with China's hypersonic and military and shipbuilding capabilities, not to mention the domestic or economic industrial capabilities. Forget that. We're just talking about military. US can't hack it at the moment. Whereas China has probably flying around 2 6th-generation aircraft, while Trump is talking about how their 6th-generation aircraft are going to be the best of the best in 5 years' time. Okay, anyway. Remember, the incredibly efficient and cutting-edge Iranian hypersonic missile capabilities, coming back to missiles, are also potentially accessible to China, right? They're both in the same global south bloc, and they're tying their connections to one another ever closer, especially after the Iran-Israel conflict. American defense officials openly admit China has the world's leading hypersonic missile arsenal by themselves. That's not even considering Iranian support, and that was what America admitted a few months ago. It's probably worse now, right? And now China will be able to scale production without worrying about supply chain disruptions because of this zirconium discovery. The discovery doesn't just level the playing field, is what I'm trying to say. It tilts it in China's favor, for better or worse. And looking at things analytically, when a rising power achieves strategic autonomy in critical military technologies, history shows us that tensions escalate rapidly because of the falling star syndrome suffered by the current frontrunner. The US faces a closing window of opportunity to maintain its military advantage, and that makes desperate measures by the US more likely. We're not just watching a mineral discovery, we're watching the moment China, at least in this facet, broke free from one of its last strategic dependencies, for better or worse. And that, because China is in that position now, and the US is likely to be even more upset, that brings us all more uncomfortably close to World War III. Start picking your outfits, guys. I recommend something very comfortable, very breathable, because you might be running around with only one pair of shirt and trousers for a while if things break out and it becomes, Walking Dead style, Fallout style, with building bunkers. For the unbiased news and analysis without the Western spin, I'll see you guys on the next one. I'm not at all stressed.